Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's inaugural member forum for Motorsport Australia. My name's Margot Foster. I'm Vice President of Motorsport Australia, and I'm delighted to be here tonight with my colleagues, Andrew Fraser, our President, Eugene Aroka, our CEO, and Charlotte Hayes, our CFO. Tonight is about information, where we've been, where we're going to, and all that we can look forward to. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to our President, Andrew Fraser. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you, Margot, and thank you to everyone for your participation in tonight's event, an opportunity to talk with you about motorsport in our country and also to hear from you and to answer your questions. My task tonight is to provide a brief report on the year that has been, 2020, certainly was the year that was, and also point to some of the directions for the future that we're looking to take as an organisation. I wanted to also mention that in addition to Margot as a colleague director, all the other directors of Motorsport Australia have joined online this evening. So Nick Rahimtullah from Western Australia, Christian Bailey from South Australia, Terry Atkinson from Tasmania, Norm Gowes from Victoria, Graham Emerton, also a Vice President from New South Wales, Paul Woodward from Queensland, Thea Jeans Cochrane, and our newest director, Coral Taylor. In addition, we have the independent chair of our Finance and Audit Committee, also in attendance, Tony South, as well as our FIA delegate, Gary Connolly. In thinking about and talking to you about 2020, certainly the year that was, it's all encapsulated for me in one stat, and it's the stat that you can see on the slide in front of you. In 2020, the number of permits that we were able to issue fell by more than 60%. Obviously, the effects of the pandemic were felt by Motorsport Australia, as indeed they were felt by other sports and by other organisations and by all of us in our daily lives. We're an event-based activity, and when events can't take place due to lockdowns, but first across the nation and then in particular states in response to breakouts, that curtailed the activity of motorsport. But the number is stark when you see it on a screen, more than 60% full. But happily, and we'll chat about this a bit later, the signs for the future are a lot stronger. If we think about how that then affected other parts of the sport, it's probably no surprise and quite understandable that more than 20% of licence holders didn't renew in 2020. People obviously felt great uncertainty about when events would return, what sort of events would return, and how often they'd be able to be conducted. And also we need to remember that individuals and their families faced their own economic uncertainties. Many people were financially impacted either in terms of their employment or their own position by the effects of the pandemic. And so there was a reduction in active licence holders, again, something that we're beginning to see turn around in 2021 already. The flow-through also took place in terms of our officials. Again, perhaps understandable and also notable that the fall here was slightly less in terms of just under 10% of officials in the face of that uncertainty didn't renew their licences. But I wanted to pause here and particularly acknowledge the efforts of our officials. I've been utterly impressed by the commitment of our volunteers, the people who make the sport happen, who give their time freely, and whose commitment is what enables our sport to operate around the nation. Finally, in terms of how this played out on the broader landscape of the sport, is you can see a number of car clubs also fell away. Again, the fall here was around 15%. But one thing I wanted to particularly acknowledge is we're seeing a number of car clubs return to the sport who've previously been with Motorsport Australia, and a particular shout out to some off-road clubs who've rejoined the fold, who've seen the value and the protection that Motorsport Australia offers them, their committee members and their participants. So a shout out to the Spencer Golf Off-Road Club, Portland Off-Road Club in Victoria, and to the Gawler Road Knights Car Club in South Australia also. And welcome back, and we look forward to welcoming others back to Motorsport Australia. One of the things that defined last year was not only the shutdown and the lockdown, but more particularly a focus on getting back on the racetrack and getting back to conducting motorsport. And the team here, led by Eugene as the CEO, did a great job in my view, and everyone can be proud of the effort that our sport put in to really lead from the front in getting motorsport up and running. That involved a comprehensive strategy that took account of the changes we needed to make to the way that we operated, to the way that we conduct defence, the safeguards that we needed to put in place to ensure that we could be responsible in a pandemic and actually get motorsport back up and running. And the two key points to call out here, one is a lot of government agencies recognised the work that we did and provided as a template to other sports to help other sports get up and running. And so I was certainly proud of the work of the team in doing that, and you should all, as part of Motorsport Australia, feel similarly proud. The second thing to say is that it was really led by grassroots motorsport. The reality of border restrictions and travel restrictions meant that many national championships were not able to take place, and so it was grassroots motorsport that led the way. And in particular, a shout out to Western Australia, who were the first state to get a motorsport event back up and running. And while the sun may set a little later in the West, they certainly got the early worm in making sure that motorsport returned a little under a year ago. It feels like a lifetime ago, but around this time last year, we were able to get motorsport up and running again in the face of the pandemic. And of course, we then had to respond to changing circumstances, and I'm sure we'll have to respond to that unfolding today, next week, and in coming months. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about tonight, though, was as we faced great uncertainty as an organisation, as the directors sat at the board table virtually across the Zoom screen, obviously, with the responsibility about the decisions to make Motorsport Australia sustainable into the future, we faced enormous uncertainty. And that meant that we needed to take a range of decisions to ensure that Motorsport Australia and the sport that it cares for and guides was able to be sustainable well into the future. What we did was we put together a task force with a cross-section of people with a deep involvement in the sport, in various parts of the sport, with different perspectives, different skills, and a range of people also who had a strong familiarity with ourselves as an organisation, not only as the sport, but the organisation itself. And we gave them the task to look at the organisation and the way that sport was conducted and to come up with views about how we adjust for the future, how we adapt, how we look to the future. And within that, there was a thoughtful exercise to really challenge us about the way that we needed to be structured and operate into the future. At this point, I wanted to really acknowledge that this led to a range of very difficult decisions. It also led to a range of decisions to change a number of elements of the way that we've previously done things. But all of those decisions were made with a really clear view about what was required in the best interests of motorsport as we look ahead. That involved, at the very highest level, a decision and a range of difficult decisions to reduce the headcount in terms of the number of people employed by Motorsport Australia. There is no more difficult decision to make around a board table or a management table than to impact someone's employment. And I wanted to acknowledge that those difficult decisions had to be made last year, but they were made in the interests of motorsport overall. I also want to acknowledge that for many people who continued to be employed by Motorsport Australia, that involved changes to their duties. It involved pay reductions or reductions in the number of hours that they were able to work. And for the senior leaders, it involved voluntary pay reductions, which I wanted to acknowledge in this forum this evening. All of those decisions were made in the face of great economic uncertainty, great financial uncertainty, and great uncertainty about how the pandemic would unfold as we looked ahead. It also involved us making changes to the way that we operate, to engage in what we've called radical simplification, to make our processes simpler and more efficient, to use more technology to reduce cost and make it easier for people to interact with the organisation and do what they need to do. That's a journey that we've commenced on, and it's one that will be a key feature of the coming years. As we look ahead, I also wanted to acknowledge that the changes were made to licence arrangements. For 90% of licence holders, that means they pay the same or less, but clearly that means that 10% of people aren't in that position, and I wanted to acknowledge that in this forum here tonight. Again, the decision was made in the overall interests of what we think we need to do in order to have the sport positioned well as we look ahead in a new normal. Now, that was a pretty heavy-going look at what took place in 2020, and it was, in many respects, difficult work for a lot of people, and a lot of impacts and a lot of changes were put in place. I don't think we're different to many other sports in that respect and many other organisations, but it doesn't mean that the impact was any lesser. However, to look ahead more optimistically, we have seen strong return to vital signs of motorsport in Australia. If we look at the number of licences processed to the end of April this year, so to the year to date, that's a figure that's up 43% on the same period of time last year. So if you think about January to April 2020, it was 2 relatively normal months and then 2 months in the grip of the pandemic. And if we compare that to what's happened in 2021, the increase of 43% is a really big turnaround, including in particular a record month for the number of licences processed in March, either renewals or new licences. So in that respect, the signs to the future are good. Some of the other vital signs of motorsport in the country are also showing positive indicators. The number of licences, officials' licences I should say, is up by more than 7% since the start of the year. I've already mentioned the strong outcome in licence increase since the start of the year and compared to last year. And most importantly, events which drive activity. Without events, there's no way you can compete. There's no officials who are able to be engaged. So they're at the core of what we do, and they're up by more than 30%. So again, a big story of last year was it was a massive challenge, but the vital signs of strength are returning, and I'm really pleased to be able to report that to you this evening in this forum. Finally, before I close off, 5 quick points from me. The first is, as I said, 2020 was a hell of a year. I joined the board in 2019 and was on the finance committee through 2020 before assuming the presidency at the start of this year in 2021. And 2020 was a hell of a year. We've done bushfires, a pandemic, and more recently floods, and no doubt there'll be other challenges that come. But the second point is that we've weathered the storm. And as Charlotte will set out to shortly, we are in a strong position still as an organisation. That's because of the decisions that we've made to look to the future, but it is important to know that we've got a strong future ahead of us. The third point is, it's been a short time since I've been president, and I've been really impressed and grateful for the support of so many people, and really impressed by the commitment of our many volunteers who make the sport possible, whether in clubland or beyond that, at statewide events or at national championship events. It's what makes our sport operate, and in particular I wanted to acknowledge that in this forum this evening. The fourth point is, while I'm the president, we'll be an organisation that's focused on our members. We are a member-based organisation, and when I say that, one of the things I want to acknowledge is when we make decisions, they will be in the best interests of members. Not all of those decisions will be universally popular, and not 100% of people will agree with 100% of decisions all the time. But I do want to emphasise that we'll be making them with a focus on what's in the best interest overall of the sport and the members who love the sport and who rely on Motorsport Australia to be sustainable and to do its job into the future. In that respect, I'm also going to acknowledge that we won't get everything right all of the time. And when we don't get it right, we'll put our hand up, we will listen, we'll be respectful, and we'll take on board the feedback. That doesn't mean, as I said, everyone's going to agree with everything, but we need to be honest as an organisation and committed to listening and adjusting where we need to. And finally, I wanted to acknowledge that the one constant will be that change is the only constant. Change is going to be a feature for us as it is for other sports, and indeed the whole of the nation and the world as we face a new normal. And as we alter that change, we'll do it in a respectful manner that does have an eye to the future. So that's it from me for now. I wanted to thank you all for your participation. I look forward to being able to answer your questions in the forum a bit later tonight, and hopefully well into the future, both in forums like this and out there at events. So back to you, Margot.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm sure we all agree that last year was one hell of a year, and Motorsport Australia, through the team led by Andrew and the board, and Eugene and his management team, have brought us out the other side. challenges notwithstanding, as Andrew said, and as Charlotte's about to tell us, the future is looking rosier. I'd also like to say that the Motorsport Australia, before the pandemic hit, was a leading national sport organisation, and I can assure you that it comes out of this phase, this crisis, as still a leading national sport organisation. And I think you motorsport lovers and fans should be very pleased with the state in which this sport finds itself. So I'd now like to introduce Charlotte Hayes. Charlotte comes to us from the Australian Grand Prix Corporation and most recently Netball Australia. And Charlotte will fill us in on the details about where we stand financially, where we've come from and what it's looking like. Charlotte.
Thank you, Margot. So as Andrew set out, obviously COVID has impacted all of us, but particularly from a sporting organisation that relies on participation and events. Many organisations across the country have certainly felt that hit in terms of their revenues. So for Motorsport Australia, that was a substantial decline in our revenue. And you can see from this slide from 2019 to 2020, we experienced a 48% drop in revenue. And when your revenue halves, you need to respond quickly. So from an expenses point of view, we were able to greatly reduce our outlays within 2020 to compensate for our drop in revenue. And actually, we managed to reduce our expenses by 51%, which in an uncertain environment was no mean feat. So part of it is logical consequence. The fact that no events were occurring means that we weren't incurring outlays in terms of event costs. But there was also some very difficult, deliberate decisions that we made to reduce costs. As Andrew mentioned earlier, this certainly meant reduced wages across the organisation, including pay reductions, reduced hours, and also a headcount reduction. So in terms of our overall result for 2020, we do present a marginal loss, but previously you can see the organisation has achieved relatively marginal operating surpluses. So in light of our revenue reduction of 48%, we're particularly proud of the result that we're able to present to members tonight. The deficit of 160k represents around 1.5% of revenue. This year in 2021, we have budgeted for a surplus, albeit small, as we still continue to navigate our way through the risks that have been presented by the pandemic. We're proceeding with caution and with a conservative approach, but we certainly hope to be in the position that we're presenting a surplus to members this time next year. From a balance sheet point of view, and just to close out the 2020 financial reporting, you can see that we've maintained overall a strong net asset position in terms of our balance sheet, and that's despite the challenges that 2020 presented us. We also wanted to take this opportunity to share with members, as we get asked, as we should, where does the money come from and what does it then go towards? So this first slide, you can see that predominantly our revenue is driven by event fees and licenses, which obviously was very, very heavily impacted within 2020, but we're looking to return to more normal levels within 2021. Additionally, additional revenue streams are from commercial income and government grants, so commercial being our corporate sponsors, and we have seen recent growth in corporate sponsorship, but that certainly remains a tough market, particularly within the sporting landscape. On the cost side, you will see that a major element of our costs is staffing. So to deliver events, we need people on the ground, and also the hard costs of delivering motorsport events such as track hire and venue operations. And then insurance is a key cornerstone of the product that we offer to you, our members, but also to other stakeholders and others that utilise our services, such as track owners and operators. Insurance is a challenge market globally, and in particular within the Australian sporting landscape. So we work very closely with our brokers, and it remains a very key focus for us to ensure that we continue to provide exceptional cover as part of your membership with Motorsport Australia. And finally, you'll see there's material spend included on technology, and that's as we look to improve the efficiency and the usability of everything we do, directly a result of the elements from the recovery task force that Andrew talked to earlier. purely with a driving force of reducing bureaucracy, paper, and reducing our environmental impact. So that's it from me, and I'll pass back to Margot.
Thank you, Charlotte. A wonderful exposition of where we are and the confidence that we can all have in where we're going. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our CEO, Eugene Aroka, who will tell us about where we're going.
Thanks, Margot. As has already been mentioned, 2020 was a very tough year, presented a number of challenges, but we took the opportunity to restructure and make some changes that would set us up for a more sustainable future post-pandemic. Importantly, leading that element of our change was the technological improvements that we've been able to implement. And at the very start of that is the introduction of the app. Most of you should have downloaded the app. It's a modern, convenient, portable way in which to interact with our organisation. And at the moment, the licence is obviously the key feature of the app, but back of house, we're doing a lot of work around improving the technological elements of our sport so that we can live up to the expectation around radical simplification. And matters such as event entry, the learning management systems, and obviously the member portal are all works in progress that are continuing to improve that interaction and minimise the paperwork, environmentally sound, cost efficient, and very interactive. And so from our point of view, we believe there's a lot of work still to be done, and we're pedalling very hard behind the scenes, and many members may not appreciate the amount of work that goes into it, but we're very excited about what lies ahead. Some practical elements of the pandemic have forced us to bring forward some of the changes we'd already planned. Our telephone system was struggling to cope with the sheer demand of the growth of the sport pre-pandemic, and during the pandemic, of course, it was positively growing, and so we brought forward changes to our phone system so that we can ensure that our members can get through to our membership team or our technical team or our motorsport team as required without having to have to wait to get through to the system. So that's just one example of seizing an opportunity and making a change for the positive. But as I said, this radical simplification, this objective of making our sport easy to interact with is really driving the future for us. So look forward to more changes. An important distinguishing factor for our organisation, which we're very proud of, is the fact that we are the national sporting entity recognised by the Australian government and all the state governments as the peak body for four-wheel motorsport. That's not something that simply happens by accident. We have over many, many years developed policies and ensured that safety and integrity and fairness are hallmarks of our sport and the way in which we operate. Some of the examples include the robust member protection policy, the child safety policy, the safety integrity rules. Our relationship with Sport Integrity Australia, formerly ASADA, is very significant to this sport. It's important that our members understand that being able to compete fairly and clean and with great integrity is very important. And so that relationship is unique to four-wheel motorsport, and from our point of view, it underpins our strong governance. We've mentioned, and as has Andrew, very strong links with government. They don't interact with us without strong confidence in our governance, and our board down walk the talk as far as that is concerned. But again, I want to close on this point about the important recognition we receive as the national peak motorsport body for four-wheel motorsport. Finally, I wanted to emphasise that we've always been very committed to providing quick responses to our members. Everyone from the board down, including myself, are very accessible by email in particular or by phone. But we felt that there was an opportunity in 2021 to reach out to the members in a more formal sense and gauge their views around how we've been operating, how we can improve, and how we can be better at what we're doing. So in the coming weeks, you'll all receive an opportunity to participate in a member survey with selected questions and an opportunity to comment about how we might be able to improve. But importantly, it gives us great insight as we reconfigure our organisation moving forward. We've made the structural changes, we see the opportunity for technology, and importantly, we want to listen to our members to see what further steps we can take, particularly around our strategic plan for the future. So we are looking forward all the time, and as Andrew mentioned, one constant is change, and we'll continue to embrace that. So in closing, I'd like to thank all of the volunteers from the board, obviously, who are our primary volunteers, but also the many officials who've officiated throughout the years, the support of the State Council, the support of the commissions, the committees, the state panels. They all came to the fore in a pretty tough year. And we're able to obviously use the advent of Zoom and webinars and information sessions. But importantly, that support has been very significant to the executive and to the board. So again, thank you to all of our volunteers and officials. And finally, all of our members, the fact that our members have gotten back to the sport. And it's not just the event numbers, it's actually the people attending the events, and the number of cars that are out on the track are starting to show great encouragement. So on my behalf and on behalf of the board and our members and our executive, thank you very much for your support for a very tough year.